I will speak on the contribution of post-secondary education to the future of work. And look, there have been hundreds of research studies that try to predict future labor markets, what jobs are going to be available in the future. In the same way, there are hundreds of studies done over decades trying to find which and link particular fields of studies, particular disciplines, to particular jobs. Most of these studies have been singularly uninstructive. Aside from being able to suggest broad areas where the labor market might go, we've seen good examples of this today. Eliza's work is a good example of this. We have not been able to predict with any degree of accuracy that's comforting which jobs will be available in the future, what number of them will be available, and at what time. And equally, we have not been able to demonstrate any correlation between the post-secondary programs, the disciplines that post-secondary students take, the credentials they receive, and the jobs they eventually occupy. And that's true even in the regulated professions. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. This is from a study we did, linking the data, using the data from the Canadian Household Survey, where we linked the field of study and we simply asked, where did people from certain fields of studies go to? And what you can see that in this case here, from a particular field, they occupy a wide range of jobs. And the reverse is true as well. If you look at a particular job category, sales and services is one of the fastest growing job categories in Canada. People come from all kinds of disciplines. Another example. Other research we have done showed that between about 2006 and 2011, there are about 26,000 people in Ontario holding a teaching credential who are not teaching. To the best of my knowledge, these people are not living in a box on the street, at least not in those numbers. Most of these people with a teaching credential have somehow found other forms of employment that works for them. And finally, let me go to an area where there's a lot of policy concern, the STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. A 2015 report from the Canadian Council of Academies told us clearly that the majority of people who graduate from post-secondary with a STEM credential do not have a STEM job. And even in the most STEM-intensive jobs in Canada, there are a sizable percentage of people occupying those jobs who do not have a STEM degree and have not pursued a STEM field of study. So what does this mean? Should we simply stop asking questions about future labor markets and what our post-secondary institutions should contribute? Of course not, we can't. These are critically important questions for any country that wants to sustain and to advance a globally competitive, knowledge-based economy. And the fact also remains that in spite of all the money being put into boutique training programs for future labor markets, the education system is by far the largest education and training site where individuals learn what they need to succeed in work and life. And we have to be able to leverage that huge investment we make in the education system to serve labor markets. Similarly, every student survey I know says that the predominant, not the exclusive, but the predominant reason students go to post-secondary education is to get a credential that gives them a good job. And the reason that there are still some governments who will continue to fund public education is because they are looking for the education system to produce graduates who will sustain and advance the economy. But it may be time that we ask different questions about post-secondary education and jobs. What every good researcher and what I think every good policy person knows is that if you want to find out something meaningful and useful, the very first step is asking the right question. So right now, Canada is investing hundreds of millions of dollars to collect better labor market information. the logic behind some of this investment goes something like this. Well, this hasn't worked so well in the past, but if we put more money into it, and if we get more granular, it's going to show it's going to work. So we're not going to ask questions about engineers. We're going to ask about chemical engineers versus mechanical engineers. And we're going to break down labor market information into finer and finer regions. Okay. So I work at an agency, the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario. One of the three big questions we look at is the relationship between post-secondary education and labor market outcomes. We're a little skeptical about these more granular labor market analyses, so this is the question we ask ourselves. We ask, what should a post-secondary education look like in a world where the workplaces of the future are volatile and precarious, where we will not know what jobs a student will have? Even if we know what first job they have, they are likely to change jobs 5 to 7 times during their working career. And most importantly, depending on the pundit you believe, Eliza made this point, that a substantial majority of the jobs that will be available to these students haven't even been created, invented, or contemplated yet. And when we ask ourselves those questions, our minds are drawn to the issue of skills. Skills that every post-secondary graduate should have, regardless of what field or discipline they come from, that will serve them well as they leave post-secondary education and go out and navigate the world of work. So we asked 4 questions about post-secondary education and skills. 1, what skills should a post-secondary graduate possess? What skills do employers want? How well do post-secondary programs teach these skills? And can we teach these skills more effectively and efficiently? So let's look at the first one. What skills should a post-secondary graduate possess? Well, if you talk to people in the post-secondary world, if you spend time in the post-secondary world, there appear to be about 4 classes of skills that we think a post-secondary graduate should have. First, they should have disciplinary knowledge. Of course they should. They should know the ideas, the concepts, and if they're in political science, engineers should be able to solve equations. You have to know the stuff, the content, the information in your discipline. But we want more. We want them to graduate with an adequate level of basic cognitive skills. They should be reasonably literate, reasonably numerate. And we want more. We want higher order cognitive skills. There is not a university or college president alive who hasn't said at some point during their term of office that if you come to my institution, you will leave this institution being a better problem solver, a better critical thinker, a better communicator than when you came in. And finally, we also expect post-secondary graduates to have a set of skills. People call them soft skills, transferable skills, life skills, behavioral skills, things like persistence, initiative, and resilience. That's what we expect post-secondary graduates to leave with. Well, what do employers want? Well, again, very few employers complain about disciplinary knowledge. They are quite content with the disciplinary knowledge, the content and information that students acquire. But as we track what employers, and we track a lot of these employer surveys, and we say, what are the skills that employers are saying they need to see in their new hires? You get to things like communication skills, these behavioral interpersonal skills, critical thinking, problem solving. This is great. When you look at what we think a post-secondary graduate should have and what employers want, there appears to be a lot of convergence. But if there's a lot of convergence, why is there so much angst and chatter about a skills gap? And the answer seems to be that there is a big difference of opinion between academics and employers about whether students actually have the skills that we believe they should have. So I'll give you 2 studies that looked at this. Simple question, done by McKinsey and the way they do these studies. Does post-secondary education adequately prepare students for work? 72% of educators said yes. Only 45% of graduates said yes. And only 42% of employers said yes. Another example, I admit a little bit more dramatic. Does post-secondary education adequately prepare students for work? This was a survey done of chief academic officers of colleges and universities across North America. 96% of them said, we're doing a good job. Only 11% of employers agreed. So who's right? The truth is, I don't know, but you don't know either. And the reason neither of us knows is because we don't measure skills in post-secondary education. It is an understood tradition and practice in K-12 education, but for the most part, what post-secondary programs do is emphasize content and information. It's mostly what many professors teach, it's what we evaluate, and what we credential. So we can't figure out what's going on unless we go and we measure skills. So we've just completed a set of trials looking at about 7,000 students in about 20 post-secondary institutions to look at the skills that post-secondary students have and how they change over time. So again, I'll give you 2 examples. This is the Essential Adult Skills Initiative. We test skills at the start of the program, and we test the skills of students who are leaving their programs. We use something called the Education and Skills Online. It's an OECD test. Canada spent gazillions of dollars helping to validate and establish this test. A sidebar on Canada Innovation. We took the intellectual property, we gave it to the OECD licensed it to the Educational Testing Service in Princeton. So for us to do this, we have to buy Canadian intellectual property from the States with American dollars. But be that as it may. And these are the institutions, 11 colleges, 9 universities, where we simply measure this, and this is what the data look like. Literacy. Percent of cohort. These things are measured in levels. What you can see is very few at level 1, some at level 2. Most of the students are at level 3 and some at level 4 and 5. These are students at the beginning, and these are students finishing their programs. A little bit of lift, not very much. Numeracy, same story. This is what you see at the entering students. These are the exiting students. A little bit of lift, not very much. I want to focus you on 2 things. Number 1, level 3. Level 3 is basic competence. This is the level a student should have to simply navigate the complexities of modern life. And what you can see is that, depending on literacy and numeracy, something about 20 to 25% of students graduating from Ontario institutions, and one BC one, have not achieved basic competency levels of literacy and numeracy. I won't belabor the next slide, but this gives you a sense of what you should be able to do at each literacy level. And I simply want to say that at level 2, you can read something, and if someone says, "Did you see that in the text?" you can say yay or nay. You start making inferences in literacy and numeracy. By the way, this is an outstanding test, in our opinion. It's an adaptive test, it's online, it's a terrific test. Only at level 3 do you start making inferences. When we go to post-secondary educators and say to them, "So what level do you think your graduate should be at?" they immediately go to level 4 and 5. No one says level 3. In fact, they all say, we shouldn't even be taking students that are level 2. Another trial. This is looking specifically at critical thinking, same design. We look at students who are starting their program. We measure students at the finishing students. This trial will continue to eventually correlate the skills data with labor market outcomes. We'll link this to income tax files. But for the moment, here's what you have to see. We're seeing, in this case, in a college population, zero lift in critical thinking from entering to exiting. We do, in this particular case, with this particular sample, see a shift in critical thinking in university. And so what do we know? We know that this has stopped working. No, this is what we've learned. Skills measurement is eminently doable at post-secondary level, and it's scalable. Every issue, technical, privacy, logistic, methodological, we have been able to solve as part of these trials. It is easily scaled to provincial and national levels. 2, most students are average, but we have too many students, about 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, who are below average, and too few are above average, and we're seeing skills gains in some situations and not in others. I won't go to the 4th question, which is, can we teach these skills more effectively? Suffice it to say that we don't know the answer to that question, because to know what pedagogical techniques are effective ways of teaching skills, you have to measure the skills, and we typically aren't doing that. And so with the hundreds of millions of dollars provincial and federal governments are putting into experiential learning programs and work-integrated learning, it would be helpful if some of that money was devoted to an issue and evaluation of whether students or those techniques are actually resulting in students with the skills. So, what are the policy implications of the arguments I've just presented to you? Policy implication 1, we should be asking ourselves, what are the new right questions to ask? Asking the same questions we've asked for the last 30 years, even if we tweak those questions a bit, may not give us the information we need to understand better the relationship between post-secondary education and the world of work. Now, let me say this. It is very hard to ask new questions. I'm only a psychologist, and I know that many people in the room are economists, and economists have a large influence on public policy in Canada. But one thing I learned later on in life was that the best economists are really just psychologists. And the best example I can give you is John Maynard Keynes, when he wrote in his introduction to the general theory of employment, interest, and money, he said the difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones, which ramify into every corner of our minds. I'm hoping that sessions like this come up with the new ideas, and we can purge some of these old ideas from our minds. Second policy implication. The sweet spot is skills. The point of intersection between the world of work and the world of post-secondary education is skills. Employers have to be very good at articulating which are the skills they need, and post-secondary institutions have to get much better at measuring those skills and ultimately credentialing them. Third policy implication. We need to pay more attention to the non-traditional learner taught in non-traditional ways. When we think about these things in Canada, we look to government for solutions, and government, I would argue, has a bias to deal with the traditional institutions that deal with the 18 to 24-year-old learners and educate them in traditional ways. But if we know anything from the presentations we've seen, there are lots of people out there who will lose their job because of automation, industry relocation, because they want to uplift their skills and uplift their lot in life. And at this point, whether they're older, work full-time, have a disability, single parent, first generation, Indigenous, the non-traditional student is now the new normal. In fact, in the United States now, 75% of college and university students would fall into a non-traditional category. If I have a non-traditional learner come to me in the United States who might have done some post-secondary, might have lost their job, wants to upgrade their skills, needs some post-secondary education and credential, I can send them to any one of a variety of competency-based education programs. I can send them to Western Governors University, that it will customize a curriculum for them, give them an individual mentor, track them, graduate them with a credential that is indistinguishable in most states from the state university, where the data already show that they are as competitive for jobs as students who go through traditional programs. It offers them the flexibility. Oh, and by the way, all of that is done at a tuition level below what the standard undergraduate is paying in Ontario. Thank you very much.